left. Ready? 2. Please join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Details dismissed.
Thank you. Troop 5972, Vienna, Virginia. I am Kathleen Cobbler of the League of Women Voters of the Fairfax area, and I will be your moderator this afternoon. Welcome to the 11th Congressional District Candidates Forum featuring candidates for the House of Representatives. It is my very great pleasure to introduce Jeff Dove, the Republican candidate, Gerry Connolly, the Democratic candidate, and Stefan Porter, the Libertarian candidate. And by the way, candidates are seated at this table in the order in which they will appear on the November ballot. The League of Women Voters of the Fairfax area is happy to have the following co-sponsors for this event: Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity, American Association of University Women, Central Fairfax Chamber of Commerce, Fairfax County Council of PTAs, the Greater Springfield Chamber of Commerce, Jewish Community Relations Council of Greater Washington, the NAACP, National Korean American Service and Education Consortium, the Northern Virginia District PTA, Virginia Interfaith, the Voice of Vietnamese Americans, and the Zeta Phi Beta Sorority. Like the League, these are all nonprofit, nonpartisan entities. Flyers with information about each of them are on the tables in the back, and we encourage you to explore the ways in which these organizations contribute to our community and offer opportunities to volunteer. The League and all of our co-sponsors would like to thank the candidates for taking this opportunity to engage the voters. Since suffragist days, the League has promoted civil and informed discourse on civic events. And this afternoon we are pleased, almost 100 years after our founding, to participate in an event honoring those same values. There are copies of the League's What's on the Ballot and 2018 Facts for Voters and Vote 411 cards on your seats. The voters' guides can be accessed at vote411.org. Please see a volunteer if you wish to register to vote or pick up an absentee ballot application form. Now, let us begin with the opening statements. Remember, these will be 3-minute timed statements.
I'm gonna
Begin.
All right. Hello, I'm Jeff Dove, the Republican nominee for Congress in Virginia's 11th Congressional District. What? You can't, yeah, see, okay. All right, I'm Jeff Dove, the Republican nominee for Congress in the 11th Congressional District. I didn't realize I was going to have to yell. I was born in Silver Spring, Maryland. I've lived in this area, the DC area, my entire life. I've actually moved between Roanoke, Virginia, and the DC area multiple times during my high school years. For some reason, my mother liked moving a lot, so I actually attended 5 different high schools, which kind of prepared me for this. I've been, after high school, I joined the U.S. Army in 2004, where I was stationed with the 4th Infantry Division in Fort Carson, Colorado, and I actually did 1 tour in Iraq. And while I was there, I went on over 230 plus combat patrol missions and was awarded the Combat Action Badge, which I wear on my lapel pin, for engaging the enemy in combat. Once I got out of the military, I actually started working in IT, and I've been working as a database administrator for the past almost 8 years now. And what I've been doing is I've been dealing with things like cybersecurity issues, database issues, et cetera, et cetera. What I'll say is, what's interesting is today we're going to be talking about issues that are facing our community. Some of these issues have been in place affecting us for decades, and nothing's been done. One thing that I've taken from my experience in the military and my experience in the private sector, et cetera, is the fact that I am a problem solver. We see problems, we solve them. We don't see the problem and continue to run on them over and over again. That is what's been going on in Washington for far too long. Also, people have been asking me why I'm running, why am I doing this? There's no shot, you have no shot, no way you can win this race. I've been telling people this since day one. I've had this itch for public service my entire life. That's why I put my life on the line for this country. That's why I'm willing to do this, put my family in, everything up for this particular race. I feel like when I went into the ballot box in 2016 and I saw one person's name on the ballot, that should never happen. I don't care what party it is. There should always be multiple voices for the people to choose from. So I decided in December 2016 to step forward, and I've been out here doing this since. So like I said, today we'll be talking about various issues. I hope you guys give me an opportunity to, discuss all these things. This has been a great experience. This is the first of 9 candidate forums that I've agreed to already. And I hope that the other candidates will attend those as well, because clearly the people of the 11th District want to hear from their current representation, and they want to hear from people who are candidates for this particular seat as well. So just to be clear, this will be a great experience for us all, and I hope we can keep it civil. Thank you guys very much.
Mr. Connolly, wait. I have been asked to remind you that we did, as the candidates have agreed to certain rules, I ask you on behalf of the League of Women Voters, to refrain from applause in between, in reaction to comments by the candidates. It sets a very different tone. We appreciate your enthusiasm. We can see that this is an enthusiastic crowd, but we ask, please, refrain from applause and other vocal demonstrations. Thank you, Mr.
Well,
Connolly.
we're not going to have 2 rules. So I'm going to ask my supporters to do the same as Mr. Dove's supporters just did, irrespective of the League's request. What's fair is fair. I'm Gerry Connolly. I'm the incumbent member of Congress. Before that, I served as chairman of Fairfax County. Getting things done has sort of been my middle name. As a matter of fact, there's a plaque right outside here of my sponsorship of part of the building of this building. There's a library the regional library down the road with a plaque that acknowledges my getting that done for the city of Fairfax. You can go a little further and see Mosaic District. I did the planning for that in Merrifield. You can also look at the Silver Line, something I championed and got done for Fairfax County, linking us to the metro system. In Congress, I've introduced 109 bills, almost 40 of which have become law in one fashion or another, and scores of amendments, which have also become law. But this election is not about that. This election is about the future of our country. And candidly, there's a huge difference between me and my opponent. He said he's been for Trump since he walked down the escalator. Well, I've been opposed to Trump since he walked down the escalator. What part of Trump are you for? Calling Mexicans rapists when he got off the escalator? The executive order banning Muslims from a number of countries that I protested at the airport? Saying that there were good people on both sides of the Charlottesville tragedy last summer? Or denying that 3,000 people were affected and died by the hurricane in Puerto Rico to justify your response? There's a big difference. This is about the future of our country, and I hope we spend some time talking about that today. It's a privilege representing the 11th District, and I'm so glad all of you came. Thank you.
Mr. Porter.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I'd like to, first of all, thank the League of Women Voters and the various sponsors for including me in this forum today. It is not a given that candidates such as myself get invited to these events, and I greatly admire the League's commitment to making sure all of you have a chance to hear from all of your candidates and their perspectives. I also want to thank all of you in the audience for taking time today to learn more about our stands and how we stand on issues. Now, more than ever, it is absolutely critical that voters are well educated and informed about issues and candidates. I trust that this event today will help you do that. My name is Stefan Porter, and I have the honor of being the Libertarian nominee for the 11th District. I've called Northern Virginia home for about 20 years and currently live in Herndon with my wife, Janice. I work in information technology, but my real passion has been the volunteer work I do with various groups, including the Knights of Columbus, Rotary, and most importantly, the Rescue Squad, where I've been a paramedic and an officer for nearly 16 years. These activities have given me the chance to interact with, listen to, and serve a wide range of people from all walks of life. I believe those perspectives and those experiences will serve me well in Congress. People often ask, why am I running? The short answer is my parents raised me to put up or shut up. I've become tired of the increased polarization and apparent inability for us to work together for this great nation. If we are to tackle the issues that face this country, we must be able to sit together, have civil discourse, and actually seek true solutions to things without making everything an us versus them mud fight. I think that spirit is a bit lacking right now, and I'd like the opportunity to bring that back. The second question I often get is, what is a libertarian? There are a lot of ways of answering that, and certainly I can't do it in 1 minute, but libertarian politics tend to focus on the rights and responsibilities of individuals. Key to my political perspective is a belief that you understand what's best for you, the people you love, and your community. The closer we can keep government to the people it's supposed to serve, with some notable exceptions, the more efficient, effective, and accountable it will be. I look forward to fielding some of your questions this afternoon. Thank you.
Mr. Dove, we have recently witnessed a rise in hate and bias crimes throughout the country and our Commonwealth, as was so tragically demonstrated in Charlottesville. In fact, according to Virginia State Police, hate crimes increased in Virginia over 50% in 2017. How would you address this, and what could you do to make the Commonwealth welcoming to all?
I think something that's happened in recent memory is the fringes of the political spectrum have become too powerful, and we've given them a platform to be able to go out and spew their hate and actually act upon this hate. And we saw this in Charlottesville. And the first thing I want to do is we need to remember those lives that we lost in Charlottesville. We lost 2 great law enforcement officers and a young lady who was just there, trying to speak her mind and use her First Amendment rights. And I think that's something that should never happen. No parent should have to deal with addressing, a child that's died from a hate crime. And I think there's been legislation in the past. Matter of fact, one of our next door neighbors, Congresswoman Comstock, after an event where the current congressman and Congressman Beyer and her participated in an event about some hate crimes in Northern Virginia, she put forward legislation to address hate crimes that has bipartisan support from most of the Virginia delegation, except for the current congressman. I would support legislation like that to address hate crimes and provide more money to law enforcement agencies to address those things. We shouldn't have people being able to go out and throw KKK flyers all over the place. I've talked about hate organizations more than I had in my entire life since I've been doing this. That should not be the case. We need to, as a community, address these people and call them out for what they are and take them down. Thank you guys very much.
Mr. Connolly?
Thank you. Look, I think when people equivocate, we have to call it out. The dog whistles about racism, white supremacism, and bigotry are all around us. When the President of the United States says both sides are equally to blame in Charlottesville, he is not speaking the truth. And it requires Republicans and Democrats and Libertarians to call that out. Some people did. Some Republicans did. My opponent has not. When Corey Stewart is the nominee of the Republican Party for the United States Senate, and he's met with known white supremacists and only denounced them subsequently when it was unveiled, when he embraces the cause of the Confederacy with a not so subtle message about race, that ought to be condemned instead of having your picture taken with him. And I think that's how you do it. I've spent my career in this community building racial harmony, giving people opportunity, embracing diversity. I've got a record. I'm proud of that record. And I'm proud of this community for insisting on tolerance. We've had, Madam Chairman, excuse me. Can you have a person put up a sign saying I just can't believe that comports
I'm sorry
with
that I
League of
missed
Women
that.
Voter rules.
That will not reoccur, Mr. Connolly, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry?
I mean, I thought we were going to have civility. I thought we were going to listen to other points of view and try to respect them. I came here in good faith, and so did most of the people here, to try to hear our different points of view. It isn't to be name-calling. And I think that's a great example, unfortunately, of what the president has empowered in terms of incivility and intolerance in our public discourse.
Mr. Porter.
I actually think both gentlemen to my right have made some good points here. There is no place for hate. I mean, libertarians truly do believe in the value, intrinsic value of every person. We have stood for equal rights, racial rights, those type of things literally since our party's formation in the early 1970s. We must condemn actions like Charlottesville. We have to, as people, stand up and say, we do not accept this. We have to be willing to look at people and talk to them. I mean, I think we sometimes paint too wide of a swath, and this is not about necessarily the people in Charlottesville. They were KKK, Nazis that deserve to be criticized. But lately, I hear like racist and things being painted so broadly. People are racist, they're traitors, they're snowballs, snowflakes. We're throwing out these terms, and all that does is build more and more hate between people. Those terms have meaning. They need to be appropriately applied to people when they matter and when they're accurate. But when we start throwing them out just against everybody, we build divisions among people and we weaken the power of those words. So,
Mr. Connolly, we'll begin with you on this round. Congress has so far failed to pass legislation to overhaul our immigration system. What measures do you suggest or support to improve our current system?
So the very first thing I think we got to do is fix the legal status of dreamers. There are maybe 700,000 young people in this country who came here when they were young. I brought one of those dreamers to the State of the Union address. She came to the United States at the age of 1. She goes to Annandale High School. She's a scholar. She volunteers to help other kids with learning difficulties. She thought she was an American until she went to get her driver's license. And then her parents had to tell her, oh, we brought you here when we came undocumented. She is as American as you or I. She wants to be an American. She thinks of herself as an American. Those young people would make most people in this room proud. I want to regularize their situation. Beyond that, we've got to make the immigration system fairer, more transparent, more accountable. Probably the single number one issue we deal with in casework in my office is immigration. And we see every day how whimsical it is. Wanting to bring grandma to a wedding and it takes 6 months. Or capriciously she's denied because she's a risk of some kind. And it's a terrible statement about our country. So we need to be fairer, we need to be transparent, we need to include increases in H-1 visas. and in other labor-oriented visas so that we have the workforce of the future we need. Immigration is good for America. It always has been. As the grandson of an immigrant, I can attest to that.
Mr. Porter.
I think overhaul is a very good word to be used. Our immigration system is flawed in so many ways. My personal belief, and I'm not a full-blown open borders person, some libertarians are, we do need some border security, but the key questions we need to be asking about immigrants are, do they legitimately pose a threat to our country? We don't want to actually let terrorists in. But the second question is, can they contribute to the country? In the vast majority of cases, the answer to both of those are the appropriate answer. They're not a threat, they can contribute. So why do we make it so hard for people to actually come into this nation? I agree with the congressman about the Dreamers. They've known nothing but being Americans. At this point, it's just plain wrong to throw them out. And whatever laws we do come up with immigration, we need to start enforcing fairly and uniformly. Having people actually be here semi-legally or whatever for 10, 20 more years to build lives and then just suddenly say, well, we're throwing you out. That makes no sense. So give the laws, set the laws, enforce the laws, but make them reasonable. So, thank you.
And Mr. Dove.
All right, so I want to go back to the previous question real quick. The congressman tried to say or attack me on race. When I announced in February last year, I had my first event locally in Fairfax, and he sent someone to intimidate me by recording me literally the first time I went out on the street. Did not do that to his previous white opponents. Let's talk about your fundraising letter that you just recently sent out about me, calling me a puppet, like as a young, successful black man, I can't think for myself. I've done a lot in my life, and being a puppet is not one of them, okay? I think for myself, I don't agree with 100% of what goes on in DC, and that's why I'm running. All right, secondly, to go back to this, to go back to this question on immigration. Immigration has been messed up for decades. We have a sitting congressman who's been in for so many years, and he talks about the problem, but he's not done anything to solve it, okay? The definition of insanity is to keep doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting a different result. Yes, we need to deal with the people who are here illegally. We need to deal with the dreamers. We need to deal with those people who are here legally. We need to address the H-1B system so it's not like an indentured servitude system where companies basically dictate to those people how they're going to live and how they're going to work. Okay, we need to address a lot of things, but it starts with doing a complete overhaul of what we have now because it's not working at all. And if we keep putting the same people back in office over and over again, it's not going to get fixed because they're just looking for the next race.
Thank you, Mr. Porter. Mr. Dove, I'm sorry. Mr. Porter, you're up first this time. Bills have come before the House to provide paid family and medical leave and to have employees of businesses with 15 or more employees provide paid sick days. If such bills come up, how would you vote?
To start with, I'm very reluctant to say for one way or another that I'll definitely vote for a bill because there's so much dirty legislation that has riders and things that are unrelated. So I just want to throw that out from the beginning because it will apply to a lot of questions. The details matter to a specific bill. I think that family leave and things like that for large corporations makes sense. I think it's a good business, regardless of whether or not it's being enforced by federal mandates or not. Big companies with significant numbers of employees, want to bring in good people and keep good people. Exactly how far the government should go in actually forcing them to do so, I am a libertarian. I believe in smaller government, generally speaking. So again, it's going to matter a lot on the very specific details of the bill. So, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dove.
Yes, I do believe family leave is important. My wife and I just had our first child last year, so I can attest to having that leave is very critical for any young family or any family in general. I believe that we should be making sure that our community is strong, right? And one of those things is making sure people are, I guess in a sense, taken care of with regards to things like that. And companies should be wanting to do things like that, because if you notice, companies that have more, I guess, lenient family leave policies, people are rushing to go apply to those jobs and things of that nature. So I think having a family leave policy is a great idea, and it's something that we should be really pushing for.
And Mr. Connolly.
Well, I have already supported family leave in several forms. I believe the federal government ought to set a minimum standard and start with itself. But I mean, all kinds of people in the workforce face family medical emergencies. They got to take care of a sick parent or spouse or child. They get pregnant, they have babies. And for both men and women, maternal and paternal leave, I think are important. So setting a minimum standard for family leave, I think, is a very important social policy. And while I agree that given the current economy, it's a competitive advantage in trying to hire people in a scarce labor market if you provide it, we don't have to go that far back in our history to know when no corporations virtually did it without pressure from the government, especially in periods of high unemployment. So having some minimal standards that protect workers' rights when they need that kind of leave and don't get punished for it, I think it's very important social policy, and I support it.
Thank you, Mr. Connolly. Mr. Dove, what is your position on developing oil production off the Virginia coast?
Well, if you guys recently saw, there was a study that showed the United States has moved in front of Russia and Saudi Arabia as it relates to oil production around the world. I believe that we should take advantage of the resources we have available to us. I think it will help our economy overall. Right now, we actually have, it's interesting, we actually have more jobs than we do people employed or people looking for jobs, which is a shock to a lot of people. And I think if you do something like this, you're going to increase the amount of jobs that are available as well. And I think this also ties into training, and et cetera. But I do support utilizing the resources that we have available. I think we have to do it smart. We have to make sure we're not damaging our environment, and that's one of the biggest things with regards to that. But we should definitely be trying to tap into any resource that we have to use. Thank you, guys.
Mr. Connolly.
I couldn't disagree more. Precisely because we are now at peak oil and gas production in the United States. The last thing in the world we need is to be exploring oil off the coast of Virginia. We have the largest preserved barrier island system in the East Coast. It would be at risk. More importantly, if you look at the Horizon oil spill that happened a number of years ago, the width of that spill would have gone from Winchester, Virginia, Woodbridge, where you live, Mr. Dove, all the way to New York City. Imagine that off the coast of Virginia. Our reserves are only 6 days of national supply, Virginia, that we know of. Why would we risk the environment, tourism, and more importantly, the Navy? The Navy has said, if you explore and put up rigs off the shore, it will cause us to rethink our location down in Norfolk. The Navy's been here 200 years. It's one of the most important economic assets Virginia has. I do not favor the environmental risk of offshore oil drilling, and I certainly don't favor risking the presence of the Navy in Norfolk that's been with us for 200 years and provides so much to the Virginia economy. It's risky, it's reckless, and I'm glad to be joined by a number of my colleagues, Republican and Democrat, who represent coastal states in the East Coast. Start with Florida. The Republican governor of Florida understands the risk to his state. We ought to too.
And Mr. Porter.
I think, honestly, at this point, it is not a good use of those resources to begin drilling. There may become a point in the future that we do need those oil reserves, although I'm hoping that we move more towards more sustainable, renewable sources of energy. Yes, I'm free market and things like that, but that doesn't mean I'm crony corporatism either. And right now, doing drills off the shore really strikes me as more of a handout to big oil and stuff like that, rather than necessarily being a good a good thing for the people of Virginia. Could that change? Could the technologies change to make it safer? Could the situation change where we need the oil? Certainly. But right now, I don't really think we've hit that point, and I would prefer not to see us drilling off the shore. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Porter. Mr. Connolly, what is your position regarding the requiring of providing birth control measures under federal law?
I favor providing coverage for birth control. When people want to space their families, when people want to have protection from diseases, we know we have an epidemic of sexual transmitted diseases in the United States. We know that the transmission of HIV can be life-threatening, and I think we have to take all customary measures to make birth control available. In addition, by making birth control available and covering it, we also help reduce significantly the number of unwanted pregnancies and abortions. So I favor universal birth control, and I certainly favor the provision of birth control. And by the way, I favor continued funding of Planned Parenthood that provides enormous medical services to women and to people seeking contraception in the United States. It's done an incredible service in the country.
Thank you, Mr. Connolly. Mr. Porter.
Birth control, I believe, again, it would depend on exactly the structure. I mean, I tend to favor less government intervention in healthcare decisions. I tend to favor more free market solutions. But in the grand scheme of things, being sure that people have access to birth control is not a bad thing. I agree, especially being more of a pro-life candidate, that it does offer the opportunity to help cut down on abortions, which in the grand scheme, if I have to weigh one against the other, I'm more in favor of providing more birth control, making things more open for birth control to people than I am of promoting and creating an environment where abortions are more likely.
And Mr. Dove?
I don't necessarily believe that the federal government should step in with regards to birth control. I think that people have options with regards to going out and getting it from various locations, whether it's city and local health departments, whether it's their colleges, whether it's high schools now. There are plenty of opportunities for people to go and find these things that they need. It's just I feel like we're lacking as a community with regards to education, letting people know where exactly they can go to get these things. And it doesn't have to be something that the federal government is forcing down your throat in a sense. So I think that that's something that people need to be more cognizant of, and we need to address as a community, once again, to get this information out to people. All right, thank you.
Mr. Porter, what is your position on sanctuary cities?
I personally think that there are laws, and that rather than try to subvert laws, we should be trying to change them as appropriate. The idea that a city can just decide to not follow federal law sets dangerous precedents. And it's, regardless of how you feel about the immigration issue specifically, it gets to be sort of a real slippery slope. I actually do believe that localities should have more control, though, over things, and at times some of the reasons why cities seek sanctuary status are things like, the government's not coming in promptly. They're saying, the sheriff in Fairfax, her big complaint was that these people are sitting in jail, federal government knows they're here, but then they're asking us to hold them beyond what we are legally entitled to hold them for. So, there are valid arguments on both sides. And so on that one, I really need to see the specifics, but I think sanctuary type things become somewhat problematic overall.
Mr. Dove.
I do believe this goes back to our earlier question. The federal government needs to address immigration entirely as an overhaul. Localities shouldn't be in this situation where they feel like they have to subvert like a Mr. Porter said, subvert national law, right? We need to make the laws so that these localities can handle these issues with illegal immigration or how people feel like they're under fire by our government and have the potential to be deported. I think we need to address the immigration system as a whole, and that will address the issues with sanctuary cities. Now, saying that, I do not agree that there should be sanctuary cities. These locations should actually utilize the laws that are currently in place. They should be upholding the law of the land. If you do not agree with the law of the land, then that's a big problem, and you should be held accountable for breaking those laws. And so that's where I stand on it. I think the federal government needs to do more as it relates to updating the legislation that's out there or updating the laws that exist in order to eliminate sanctuary cities by making it so they don't have to go that route. Thank you.
And Mr. Connolly?
I believe the whole concept, sanctuary cities, is tainted by the right-wing bias against immigration. This is an attempt to try to persuade the public that there is an organized effort to actually avoid or disobey the law by localities and states. That's not true. Here in Fairfax, we've announced that we will not cooperate with ICE, as my libertarian opponent indicated, not to violate the law, but to detain people beyond the legal limits at the request of ICE because of ICE's behavior. If you want to talk about violation of the law, how about we start with separation of children from their families? Court after court in the United States found that was a violation of law. And that ought to be something all of us are concerned about. There are still over 500 children separated from their parents. Are you a parent? Are you a grandparent? Can you imagine the anxiety that child experiences, let alone the anxiety you as a parent experience? It happened in America. It's not right. If we're going to fix the immigration system, let's fix the immigration system. But let's start with making sure those who are charged with enforcing immigration law must be as pure as snow. They cannot be violating the law or abusing human rights in the execution of their duty.
Mr. Dove, what do you think should be done about health care coverage for all?
So to go back to that point that was just made, how many families were separated the entire time you've been serving? Because that has been happening for a very long time. It's not a new problem. Also, real quick, no applause and stuff. To go to healthcare, what I'll say is one of the biggest problems that seems to exist with our healthcare system is there's somewhat of a predatory nature with regards to how healthcare is distributed. You have somewhat of a predatory nature with regards to prescription drug prices, services that are levied by healthcare providers, et cetera, et cetera. That won't change with government control. What will happen is they'll just keep raising their costs. Just like with any other contracts that exist, those companies will keep raising their costs, those organizations will keep raising our costs until our country is pretty much desperately broke. And that's what would happen with if you go to some Medicare for All system. You would have these companies basically dictating where all of your taxpayer money is going. Is that what everybody wants? Because that's what's going to happen. I hear all these candidates talking about Medicare for All, but they don't tell how you're going to pay for it. Each and every one of us would be paying for it. Probably tenfold of what we actually have to give. And so with regards to healthcare, it starts by addressing the issues with the costs. Like we haven't addressed it. Obamacare was passed, and the costs kept rising even though they said they weren't going to. And so that we need to start there.
Most insurance companies would tell you that the reason premiums have been going up in the last few years is because of Republican attempts constantly to undermine the Affordable Care Act. Risk insurance corridors, price stabilization mechanisms, and even including in the tax scheme, repealing the individual mandate, which was a Republican idea from the Heritage Foundation. And yet, The program has expanded. More insurers are coming back this year, and the rise of premiums is going down, despite Trump and the Republican efforts to undermine a law that was duly passed and found to be constitutional. Affordable care is necessary in America. I support the Affordable Care Act. I support the pro-consumer provisions on, for example, previous existing conditions that Republican legislation would repeal. I'd like to say to my young staff, if you're lucky enough to live long enough, you too will have a pre-existing condition. It's kind of, yeah, it's the human condition. But there were people denied health care coverage because they had one. Children with autism, they were that was defined by insurers as a pre-existing condition. That's lifelong. Devastating to families. Devastating. We had insurers who would watch, diagnoses, and the minute a woman got diagnosed with breast cancer, she was denied coverage. That is now illegal.
Mr. Porter.
I think when we look at coverage issues, one of the things that has bothered me is it's all about coverage. The discussions have consistently about how do we make coverage affordable. I really would like to see more focus, as Mr. Dove sort of hinted as well, on how do we make health care more affordable? How do we tackle things like out-of-control drug pricing? How do we do things that make cost of hospitalization more transparent? How do we actually lower health care cost? Because if we can lower health care cost, that benefits everyone across the board. Doesn't matter if you're insured or not. If the cost of the service is lower, that's going to benefit everyone. Medicare for all, I'm a little bit worried about it simply because I look at other, at least in our country's experience, other ways the federal government has run healthcare, whether it's the VA or even the Medicare system, and so I'm concerned. It's one of those things that I would want to really see what we're proposing. I don't like the ACA, largely because I felt it tried to blend two different approaches, a free market approach versus, if you will, a more socialized approach. And in the process, I don't think it necessarily got the best parts of both. I think it actually ended up sort of playing on the weaknesses of both. So, that's where I would stand. And again, ultimately, it would depend what came down. The other thing, though, is if we were to go down the path of Medicare for all or something like that, I really think it should be through a constitutional amendment, because then it can't be played with back and forth as Congress changes.
Mr. Connolly, our children are dealing with tens of thousands of dollars in student debt. What would you do to change this?
I'm very sympathetic because it turns out I'm a parent who apparently in Congress has the highest student debt carried. I didn't know that. I thought my daughter was paying for her college education. So I'm very sympathetic. Look, it's a huge debt overhang, and there are several things that have to be done. I favor making community college free so that students can transfer and it can relieve that debt burden. I supported legislation to renegotiate student debt loans to reduce the interest rate. Those things, unfortunately, have been resisted by the Republican majority in Congress since they took over in 2010. But I think there's a lot we have to do to try to make college and university more affordable. Some of that's going to have to be done both by new infusion of federal resources in higher education and at the state level. Let's take Virginia. We have some of the best college state universities in the country, but most of them are probably under 20% state funded because the General Assembly won't appropriate the funding for its own universities, forcing universities to increase the number of out-of-state students to get full tuition and to look at other mechanisms of funding, including private grants and donations and naming buildings after people and so forth. We've got to get serious about investing in higher education in the United States. It's the single most important investment we make for our country's future.
Porter.
I frankly would like to see the federal government get out of student loans, period. They are not really a particularly good deal when you think about it for the students or for the federal government. The people that benefit the most from student loans are the loan servicers. If we're going to throw federal government dollars, which is a whole different question, into education, I'd much rather see it be done in things like grants and things, because we're hooking students on with this loan debt. And where else do we actually offer loans to people without any consideration whatsoever of their long-term ability to pay them back? You know, it is one of the few places where you go for a loan and your eligibility criteria is actually based more or less on the fact that you cannot afford this, and therefore you should be getting this loan. That model is flawed. And then these students get on the hook for these relatively high interest rate loans, and there's no relief, right? You cannot get out from under, well, you can die or you can become permanently disabled. Short of that, it's extraordinarily difficult to get out of a student loan. They survive bankruptcy, all this. It leads towards reckless spending patterns, reckless lending patterns, and like I said, there's, I think, better ways to spend federal government dollars than in supporting student loan programs.
All right, so real quick, I have a lot of friends that have been saddled with student loan debt. And one thing I'll say about it is I feel like we don't put an emphasis on the alternatives to college enough. I think what's happened is we've programmed children too much to just focus on going to college and getting this 4-year degree. I can tell you personally, in my experience working in IT, there's a lot of people who don't necessarily have those degrees, but they have the skill set that gets them to where they need to be and be successful. I think we need to put a real emphasis in our schools, especially on the STEM areas, science, technology, engineering, and math. I think those are things that we need to focus on. And a lot of those schools, the trade-related schools or the technical schools, are way cheaper than these colleges, and colleges have classes where kids don't even necessarily want to be involved in. I can tell you personally, I didn't want to go to sociology class, but I did it anyway. So I know there's plenty of kids that are in that same boat, and now they're saddled with this debt that they can't get out from under before they even take their first paycheck from a job. And that's something that we need to address by making sure that there are more opportunities that aren't necessarily as costly as these 4-year college programs or longer.
Thank you. Mr. Porter, is our Social Security system in jeopardy? And if you think it is, how would you reform it?
Well, I think anyone who does not think our Social Security system is in jeopardy hasn't been paying attention. That obviously right now we're actually paying out more than we're bringing in, if I understand it correctly. Funding is looking like it's going to run out. But this isn't exactly new news. I was being told this as a young man that, I probably shouldn't be counting on Social Security. As far as how do we save it, it's several major problems with the Social Security system. One, it was never really designed to be a federal retirement pension program, and so it was never funded in that style. Two, when it was funded, it was looking at life expectancies on average of roughly 3 to 5 years past when you actually started collecting. Now people are routinely living 20, 30, potentially more years. So the system itself, if it's something we want to actually keep and maintain, basically is one of those other things that is just going to have to be overhauled. I honestly am not sure there is any way to truly save it. There are some things that might be able to extend it some, raising retirement age, looking at the contribution caps, those type of things. But the system needs a lot of help. So,
Mr. Dove?
Yeah, I do agree. The Social Security system does need help. I would say that there's a couple lines of thought where people have talked about raising the age that you can start collecting or raising the caps, et cetera. But I think it's become a problem to the point where you have people we don't have enough workers currently to cover the people who are retiring. And that's part of the issue with the funding that is coming about. Now, you would hope that with all these new employees that are coming into play that we would be able to address it. But I think without changing the way we're doing spending or taking money from somewhere else to address this issue, we're not going to be able to completely do it. And I think what's happened over the past 30, 40, however many years is we haven't had people with the courage enough to go out and actually make a change to it to address what's actually wrong. And I think that's something that would have to happen in Washington. But there's so many external forces pushing against that I think it would be really hard. But those are some of the ideas, just, dealing with the age and changing the retirement cap to try and salvage the system. And we don't have, apparently based on different studies that have come out recently, we don't have that much time left to actually address it. So something needs to happen in the next 10, 15 years to actually address the Social Security issue.
Mr. Connolly.
Thank you. Social Security is alive and well. And if there's one public policy that lends itself to fairly clear solutions, it's Social Security. It's got a huge trust fund from which the federal government borrows. Because of demographics, baby boomers retiring, we're going to start to have an outflow of money, not a crisis, but an outflow of money. We want to keep it solvent going forward forever. There are two things you can do that fix Social Security 100%. One is lift the cap on the income subject to the withholding tax. Right now it's $118,000. So if you make $1,118,000, that extra $1 million, zero tax for Social Security. You could lift the cap and lower the tax rate at the same time. That takes care of 71% of the problem. And then pick another option. Gradually raise the age again for future generations to 70, and that fixes the rest of the problem pretty much. Or go to change CPI in terms of how you calculate the COLA, or start means testing. Any one of those three things added to the withholding, the income subject to withholding, solves Social Security for the indefinite future. This is not an insoluble problem. And again, my friends on the other side of the aisle like to say it is to persuade you that Social Security is a bad idea and we just can't afford it. Not true. And oh, by the way, if we got a rational immigration system that allowed more immigrants into the country, we'd have more people paying into Social Security as well.
Mr. Dove, what are your thoughts on climate change? What would you propose regarding any legislation? And is there a way to work across the aisle on such actions?
Once again, I don't think the federal government is necessarily the answer for this situation. I think that we have to have a lot more of discussion between private sector entities in different areas, right? Like, so as an example, you have X coal company and A coal company. Those companies need to be working with each other to try and reduce, emissions or things of that nature. What I'm saying is there needs to be more discussion around actually innovating in these spaces to address our environment. We don't have enough of that. What we have is basically DC basically telling everyone, hey, you're going to do this. And when that happens, what happens is all these these companies, coal companies, whatever they may be, get stifled to the point where they're almost out of business. I've seen it when I haven't just been campaigning in this area. It's been interesting. I've been campaigning around the Commonwealth of Virginia. And when you go out in the Southwest, you saw how those organizations and companies were doing poorly after all this stifling regulation was put into place. But as soon as those regulations were slightly lifted, oh my gosh, they can go out and hire employees. They can go out and buy equipment. They can go out and do all these things. And that's something that the federal government needs to somewhat get out of the way in a lot of these cases, a lot of these things that we've been talking about.
I couldn't disagree more. Start with the fact that the United States is now the only country not in the Paris Climate Accord, which we helped write. First time ever, every country in the world came together and agreed, climate change is real, we got to do something about it if we're not all going to die in heat and look like Mars. You'd think we might get concerned about that. It's hardly a federal imposition. And now because of Mr. Trump withdrawing, we're the only country in the world not a party to the Paris Climate Accord. Climate change is real. There's scientific consensus about it. We need a robust, rigorous federal government helping us cope with it. As we speak, we've got fellow countrymen experiencing the effects of climate change with the hurricane. We've got higher tides, we've got rising sea levels, we've got rising temperatures that affect the formation and intensity of storms. We can turn around global climate, but we got to do it soon. And we got to come together. And we've got to work to reduce CO2 levels. Now, I also disagree philosophically that somehow EPA regulations, if only they got out of the way, coal companies would solve our problems. I don't think so. EPA regulations historically have made clean water, clean air, people safer, environment safer, and the workplace safer. I favor a robust EPA. I don't favor the dismantlement of it that's occurring in this administration.
Mr. Porter.
Well, first of all, climate change is real. I mean, I think there's plenty of scientific evidence towards that, but we do have to be somewhat careful about what we're attributing it to. Is man part of a problem? Certainly. I mean, there's a lot of people. So we need people and good researchers, good scientists to truly take a look at the issue. I'm not an expert in this area. And in areas that I'm not an expert, what I want to do is listen to people who are experts from different sides. We have to be careful, though, that we don't just squash one side, especially when it comes to science, but we actually do listen. The risk with the regulations, and I also see that, you know, the odds of big coal or big oil being particularly favorable towards promoting the best regulations possible, or, you know, let's be honest, they're in it for a profit. But we also have to be careful that we don't make these regulations so stringent or so demanding that we end up just causing industries to relocate. It is a worldwide problem. And if we end up out causing pollution stuff to end up going to countries with even poorer controls, you know, so we have to find that sweet point. And I'm not saying that's easy. It's not. If it was easy, we'd have solutions already. So, you know, I need some smart people. So if you're really smart about climate change, please conduct my campaign and help educate me a little more about this. So, thanks.
Mr. Connolly, how would you address the national debt?
Well, one thing I wouldn't do is pass a $2 trillion deficit adding tax cut, 80% of the benefits of which go to the top percentile of income earners in the United States. I think that was a tragic decision. We could have had a bipartisan bill that focused on the middle class, and we didn't. It was passed without hearings. It was passed without a single Democratic vote. It was rushed through the Congress, and it is going to hurt Northern Virginians, by the way. So I wouldn't do that. We have to come together, and we have to get serious about that debt. Stop adding to it. Have a pay-go provision, which I've supported, that says if you have a nifty idea, you got to figure out how you pay for it. And you got to do that as part of the legislation. That actually worked. I will remind us that when Bill Clinton was president with a Republican Congress, we balanced the budget 4 years in a row without a constitutional amendment, without draconian measures. But you can't balance the budget if you hemorrhage revenue and only focus on spending. You have to focus both on spending and on revenue. And that's unfortunately the failure of the Republican majority in Congress. They will not deal with revenue realistically. And now that they're in charge, deficits don't matter anymore. There was an editorial in the Post about it just today. Well, deficits do matter. The debt matters. It's an overhang we're going to pass on to future generations. And it's time for responsible action.
Mr. Porter.
I've changed my priorities slightly to put criminal justice issues a little higher up, but when I first started my campaign, the number one priority of my campaign was the concept that debt is bad. That, you know, when I started my campaign, we were looking at possibly hitting 20 trillion debt soon. Well, we've blown that out of the water. We have to look at spending reform. The idea that we did all this tax reform, and I'm a lower tax type of guy, I really am. But we actually sort of put the cart before the horse. We took and said, you know, we didn't look at spending reform. We didn't really look at how much money we need to supply government for the things government should be doing. Instead, we passed a tax package that didn't look at it, and then I can't actually say what I think about the omnibus because there are children present. But then you pass this bill that literally shoots the deficit up by 800 billion something. We have to get smarter. We have to take a hard look at spending, and then once you look at spending, look at government programs, then you look at tax strategies that make sense in light of what is a reasonable spending level.
And Mr. Dove?
What I'll say about this, the debt is, one of our major problems, right? And one of the things that's happened over the past 10 years is our debt has ballooned to the number that it is today. Yes, this tax legislation does apparently add money to the deficit, but what's interesting is you've seen reports of revenue coming up, GDP is going up where it is today, right? The stock market is doing what it's doing. Our economy is booming, businesses are doing all these different things right now. What we need to really address is our government spending. Just like Mr. Porter talked about, there are so many ways that we are either wasting money or government agencies aren't using the money properly, et cetera, et cetera. It goes on down the line, and I think we need to address that. There's not enough transparency. I hear this every single election cycle. We need more transparency in the government over and over and over again, but we don't see it. None of us ever see these results. And what I keep hammering on with, as I've been going around doing this for almost 2 years, is that we need actual transparency in government. We don't need this cloud over every single agency wondering what in the world they're doing with our taxpayer money. It needs to be utilized properly, and then we can start getting back to the times when, yes, we did have a balanced budget. But until then, that's not going to happen. So that's something that I'll really be pushing for if elected, to be focused on trying to address the debt. Yes, you talked about people in the Republican Party not focused on the deficit anymore. That's a problem within the Republican Party. And I'm trying to address that as well.
Mr. Porter, would you co-sponsor the Disability Integration Act or any other legislation that supports ADA?
I'm not familiar with that particular act, so that I just have to put forward. I think we do need to have some reasonable legislation in place that helps people with disabilities reach their full potential. So without actually knowing what the legislation is exactly, it's hard for me to comment, and I apologize for that. It's just an area that I haven't prepared well. Again, I would need to see the legislation. But I think overall, the ADA in many cases, the existing ADA at least, has helped people with disabilities live more full lives. And for the most part, I don't think it has put huge burdens on the private sector to do so. Reasonable accommodations, you have to look at things. I work in a field where is largely exempt from many aspects. Being a paramedic, there's certain things you have to be able to do. But, with my IT job, it's not a big deal for my company to make Braille keyboards available or things like that. Very small companies, perhaps it would, but hopefully there are opportunities out there for organizations that support things to actually get involved as well and say, hey, you're a small company, we know this is hard for you to do. Here, we're going to help you a little bit with some funds or something so that you can help this person reach their full potential. So, thank you.
Mr. Dove.
I definitely support legislation that would address, some of our most needed help people that exist. I would say that I think we have to make sure that we're protecting people that have disabilities and helping them out in any way that we can, whether it's setting up something where businesses have to make reasonable accommodations. Someone reached out to our office and was asking about, or was telling us a situation about where they had an organization that was trying to fight them when it came to making a ramp so that they could, their child could actually access this location. Well, needless to say, they've been working through the legal options they have to get that ramp put in so that they can go in. Now, it's interesting. We shouldn't be having any situation where we're not treating people fairly like this, right? We all know of people. We've got people in our families that are dealing with things like this, and we should always, as a people, as a community, try to take care of individuals like that. And so I would support legislation as it relates to that. Thank you.
And Mr. Connolly.
Well, yes, the answer is yes. I do and always have. And I believe the ADA, the Americans with Disability Act, one of the most transformative and visionary pieces of legislation Congress ever passed. And by the way, it was with the support of a Republican president. In today's world, sometimes the ideological right wants to call that undue interference by the federal government. That's a proper role of the federal government. To protect fellow citizens, to try to level the playing field, to help families lift up one of their loved ones who suffers a disability, to integrate them as best we can into schools, into the workplace, into community life. And I think it's a very empowering act. I think it's a proper role for the federal government, and I'm proud for the fact that I have supported it.
Mr. Doe, the issue of housing diversity and access to affordable housing is a major and growing challenge all across this country. What policies would remedy the situation?
Well, one of the things, as I say, is people talk about the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, but one of the things that gets lost in that piece of legislation is the economic opportunity zones. And that was a policy that came about, the idea of Jack Kemp a long time ago, where he talked about lifting up impoverished areas by taking capital gains money and utilizing it in those areas to increase businesses, et cetera. So one of the things that I would like to see is, once you have these businesses come in and people have more jobs, then you can have this more affordable housing for these people in these areas. I think that we don't focus on, I don't want to say the lesser, but the less fortunate enough with regards to their economic circumstances. I've grown up, when I grew up, I was in a home that was on welfare. So I understand what it is to work our way from, getting government assistance to a point where I'm self-sustained. So I think that there's a lot of, the focus needs to be on the word opportunity and giving people more opportunities to lift themselves up in various communities, and as it relates to their housing situation as well.
Mr. Connolly?
Well, I don't believe the tax bill, as passed by my friends on the other side of the aisle, provides opportunity. I mean, for the average American. As a matter of fact, by the way, people in this audience, we were talking about student loans earlier. The Republican bill actually limits home equity loans tax deductibility on the interest only to a home improvement. So if you were getting a home equity loan to pay for your kids' college, previously you could deduct the interest on that, not anymore. Thank you. With respect to opportunity in America, I'm a big believer in making investments that work. Head Start is an investment that works. It's not a handout. It's a very important program that empowers kids. Community development block grants, one of the most creative and innovative tools we've got at the local level to do all kinds of things, make investments that empower people. We have parts of the education plan that empower girls, empower disabled kids to learn, to have a level playing field, to have opportunity. Those are creative and inventive ways the federal government has played a positive role that has empowered and created opportunity. And unfortunately, in every one of those cases, the Trump budget would slash or eliminate those investments. I think that's a huge step backward, and I believe it's going to hurt the opportunity for future generations.
Mr. Porter?
I think in a lot of these issues that getting things back more to the localities is a better approach. What is going to work best for helping a housing situation in New York City may be very different from a housing situation here. The idea behind a lot of these block grants and stuff is the idea that, we're going to throw all our money up to the federal government, put it in there, and hopefully our goal, of course, is that we get our fair share back, right? Or let's be honest, we're sort of hoping we get more than our fair share back. But that's really hard these days to actually make happen, especially without earmarks and some of the things that I think we've rightfully largely eliminated from legislation. The best way to make sure you get your fair share back into your communities is not to send the money up in the first place. To have programs locally, is it a local tax or something, or a state tax? But I think the idea that the federal government can be this clearinghouse of funds, and that somehow federal solutions are always going to be the best one-size-fits-all type of solution, just don't make sense. Some things it does. This, I think, is one that there's enough diversity in the needs of those communities, and what's going to work best is better to leave the control and the funding closer to them.
Thank you, Mr. Porter. Due to time constraints, this must conclude the question and answer portion of the afternoon. But remember that the candidates will be available to speak with you directly after this. Remember as well that all of the questions that were asked and all that we didn't get to, and there's a table full here, all of those will be compiled and forwarded to each of the candidates so that they see your concerns and perhaps would respond. We'll now begin with the closing statements, and because Mr. Dove began the last round, we'll begin with Mr. Connolly.
Thank you, and I want to thank the League and all the co-sponsoring agencies for today. And thank you to all of you for showing up. What a great crowd. And I think it does show the level of interest we have in our current political situation. If the Democrats win the majority this November, I will become the chairman of the Government Operations Subcommittee of the Government Oversight Committee. And we'll finally do some oversight. I'm a big believer in accountability. On any administration, we have 62 subpoena and hearing requests to the current leadership of our committee, and 0 have been responded to. 0. No interest in anything. And I think that's wrong. I think that hurts the republic. I think it hurts democracy. And so, come next January, if we're in the majority, and if you all will have me again as your congressman, I assure you, we're going to insist on accountability. We're going to look at conflicts of interest. We're going to look at ethical questions and behaviors by cabinet members and sub-cabinet members. We're going to look at security clearances in the White House and who gets what and how. We're going to look at the response to the hurricane in Puerto Rico and try to understand what went wrong with FEMA. We owe that to our fellow Americans in Puerto Rico. And those are just a short list of many, many items we're going to look at. This election's about accountability. This election is about putting a check on the President of the United States, because unfortunately those in the majority now will not play that role. I wish they would. I've encouraged them to. I have always worked with Republican colleagues on every bill I've introduced and on every bill I've gotten passed. I seek out a Republican partner, but when it comes to oversight, there isn't anyone. And so the voters have to make that correction and that judgment this November. I'm a key member of the Democratic team in the United States Congress, and I've represented this area for a number of years. I hope you render your judgment, and I hope I'm worthy of your support once again. Thank you so much for today.
Mr. Porter.
I want to thank all of you for your questions, your passion, and your concerns. 90 seconds is not much time to respond to many of these often difficult and complex issues. I think one problem we do run into is we tend to look right now for soundbite solutions, things that look good on paper real fast. But a lot of these things do require a lot more discussion. So I hope you will seek me out after this to talk to me, or if we can't talk today, reach out to me through my campaign. I'm more than willing to talk with people, more than willing and eager to hear your opinions and your thoughts on issues. I do have a few things to ask of you all today, though. 1, please take time to get to know all the issues and candidates on your ballots. 2, in your process of learning about issues, candidates, and things like that, don't sole source things. Look for news sources and other things from other perspectives. If you're a CNN fan, look at Fox. If you're a Fox fan, look at CNN. We have to get to a point that we're becoming better informed and critical thinkers. And if you live within just one thought or idea bubble, that's not going to happen. And then third, and most importantly, please vote. Take the time to learn about the candidates, take the time to learn about the issues, and then go to the ballots in November and vote for the candidate that you believe in, whether that's Mr. Dove, Mr. Connolly, or myself. I want to thank you again, and I look forward to speaking to you after we finish the formal program.
Mr. Dove.
First, I want to thank the League of Women Voters and all the co-sponsors for having this event today. I want to thank all of you for coming out. The interest is quite high for this. This is one of 9 candidate forums I've agreed to already across the 11th district, so there seems to be a lot of interest in this particular race. One thing I'll say is, yes, this is about accountability. We've been doing the same things over and over again for years with regards to our representation at local levels, in Congress, etc. We need people with fresh perspectives and new ideas that will actually try to solve our problems and not just run for the next race. That's what we need in Congress, and that's what I hope to be. When I joined the U.S. Army, I didn't join just to fight for Republicans or Democrats or independents. I joined to fight for every single American, and I hope to take that with me to Congress if I'm so elected by you. When I looked at the ballot last week and saw my name on it, I was so humbled, and I thought about this one thing. I'm not doing this for myself. I'm doing this for everyone in this district who doesn't feel like they've been represented for the past 10 years. I'm doing this for all of those people. I'm doing this for my child. I'm doing this for everyone else's children. When I'm called a puppet and someone that won't be a check on the executive branch, that is a lie, a blatant lie. I will be that person. If you want to know more about me, you can find out more about me at www.doveforcongress.com. You can go to my Facebook, Twitter, email me. I'm an IT guy, so I'm always connected if you want to reach out to me. Thank you guys very much again for being here. God bless you all. God bless the Commonwealth of Virginia, and God bless America.
Thank you, Mr. Dove. Gentlemen, we thank you all for the lively exchange. We thank you for your cooperation, and on behalf of our co-sponsors, we thank you for attending this afternoon. Remember to vote on November 6th.